I walked into the lawyer's office that morning with a calm I didn't really feel. The air smelled faintly of coffee and polished wood, the kind that usually signals business, not betrayal. I thought I was just here to sign some routine papers, nothing more. The receptionist smiled, but even her cheer seemed forced, like she sensed the tension clinging to me. When the lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Carter, finally motioned me into her office, I sat, my hands gripping the leather armrests, trying to steady a tremor I didn't want anyone to notice. She had the stack of documents in front of her, and as she flipped to one page, her expression shifted, just slightly, a small twitch in her eyebrow, but enough to make my stomach drop. "Mr. Daniels," she said, and I could tell by her tone this wasn't routine. "We need to talk about your property." I nodded, trying to play it cool. "Everything okay?" I asked. Her lips pressed together and then she pushed the papers toward me. That's when I saw it. My house, my life's work, the place I built with my own hands, was listed under another name. My son-in-law's name. My throat went dry. I blinked at the page, unable to comprehend. How? Why? The air seemed to thicken around me, every heartbeat a drum in my ears. I wanted to scream, but the sound stuck somewhere between my chest and my throat. My hands shook as I touched the paper. This was real. Carter cleared her throat, patient but firm. "It looks like it was transferred without your knowledge. Legally, it's complicated, but we can challenge it." I felt a rage I didn't even know I could feel. A betrayal that wasn't abstract. It was tangible, like the leather of the chair pressing into my palms, like the sharp smell of fear mixed with anger. I could hear the faint hum of the office AC, but it might as well have been the sound of my world cracking apart. I left that office that day with more than just papers in my hands. I carried a storm, and I knew deep down this wasn't just about the house anymore. This was about respect, pride, family, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that from me. Not quietly. The drive home was a blur. My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard it left impressions in my palms. The streets of my neighborhood, the same ones I'd walked with my daughter when she was little, felt alien. Every familiar corner suddenly whispered that someone else was claiming what I had built. When I pulled up to the house, I paused, staring at the brick facade. The porch where I'd taught my daughter to ride her first bike. The swing in the backyard creaked in the wind, a sound that felt almost like laughter at my expense. I wanted to storm inside, to confront him, to demand an explanation, but I didn't. Not yet. I went inside quietly. The smell of cinnamon from my daughter's kitchen lingered, a reminder that life was supposed to be warm here, safe, and yet everything had shifted. My son-in-law, Mark, was in the living room, scrolling on his phone, completely unaware, or pretending to be, of the storm raging in me. "Hey, Dad," he said without looking up. "You having a good day?" The words were casual, but I could hear the challenge beneath them. I swallowed the urge to grab him by the collar and shake some sense into him. Instead, I let the silence grow heavy. He finally looked up, sensing something, and his confident smile faltered just a fraction. "I know what you did," I said, voice low but steady. "The house, it's in your name." Mark froze. That's all it took. The air shifted. The comfortable bubble of his arrogance popped. He opened his mouth, probably to explain, to justify, to charm, but I held up a hand. "Don't," I said. "Save it. I'm going to fix this. And when I do, you're not going to like it." I left the house that night feeling a strange mixture of dread and clarity. The fight wasn't over. It had just begun. And I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Mark had underestimated me, and that was his first mistake. The next morning, I didn't wait for the sun to fully rise. I pulled on my old leather jacket, the one that still smelled faintly of my father's cologne, and headed straight to the local bank where I kept the mortgage records. Every step I took felt heavier than the last, weighed down by betrayal and disbelief. How could someone I welcomed into my family, someone I trusted, just take? The thought churned in my gut like fire and ice together. Inside the bank, the sterile smell of paper and ink made my stomach twist. I met with a clerk I'd known for years, and for the first time I realized how small the world suddenly felt. "I need every document, every transaction, every signature connected to my house over the last 2 years," I said. my voice calm but cutting through the quiet like a knife. The clerk blinked, then nodded, sensing that I wasn't here for pleasantries. Hours blurred into one another as I sifted through pages and pages of records. My hands ached, my eyes burned, but I couldn't stop. Every signature, every notarized transfer, every clause I hadn't noticed before, it all painted a picture I didn't want to see. But I saw it anyway. Mark had been meticulous. He'd played the long game. Yet, meticulous as he was, he'd left a thread loose, a loophole I could exploit. By the time I left the bank, the city streets had grown dark. The wind carried a sharp chill, biting at my face. But I didn't care. I drove home, my mind already racing through every possible strategy. Confront him directly? Not yet. Alert my lawyer? Absolutely. Gather proof. Document every detail. Prepare to dismantle his move piece by piece. When I arrived, Mark was gone. The house felt emptier than usual, as if it sensed the storm coming. I walked through each room, touching the furniture, the walls, the floorboards, as if reminding myself that this was my home. Every creak of the floor under my shoes, every faint echo in the empty hall, became a pulse. My heartbeat synchronized with it. I went to my study, pulled out my old laptop, and started drafting emails, gathering witnesses, mapping out legal avenues. But amid all the planning, one thought kept gnawing at me. This wasn't just about the house. It was about respect, trust, the unspoken rules that hold a family together. And Mark had broken them all. By the time I finally leaned back in my chair, exhausted, my hands trembling from too much coffee and too much anger, I realized something else. This fight would test more than my legal knowledge. It would test my patience, my restraint, my ability to stay 2 steps ahead while the fire of betrayal roared in my chest. And I would win. I had to. Because losing wasn't just losing a house. It was losing myself. I didn't sleep that night. My mind kept replaying the betrayal in loops. Mark's smug smile, the way he'd looked at me like I was naive, like I wouldn't notice. I pored over the documents again, each page a knife twisting deeper into my pride, but also a roadmap. Every signature, every date, every transaction became a weapon I could use. By dawn, I was on my way to see Carter, the lawyer. Her office smelled of leather and polished oak again, but this time, the air felt charged, electric with possibility. I slammed the files down on her desk and didn't even wait for pleasantries. "He thinks he can play me," I said, my voice low and sharp. "I need to end this, clean, legal, and in a way he won't forget." Carter studied me, her eyes narrowing slightly, then softened. "You've got a solid case," she said, "but you have to move carefully. He's trying to cover his tracks and the courts take time. If you rush, you could tip him off." I nodded. Time. Patience. That was the hardest part. I wasn't used to waiting when my blood was boiling, but I knew she was right. This was a chess game, and he was already making moves on the board. I needed to anticipate, not react. I left the office and drove past my house, pretending to admire the morning light hitting the brick walls. From the sidewalk, it looked peaceful, normal, but inside, the gears were turning. I'd started making calls. Old friends, neighbors, anyone who could back up my story. Anyone who had seen unusual activity or transactions. Slowly, I began building a web of evidence. Later, at home, I caught sight of Mark in the driveway. He was loading something into his truck, casual, confident. I stopped and watched him. Every step, every movement I memorized. I didn't confront him. Not yet. This was about control, not venting. I wanted him to underestimate me. Let him think I was planning a quiet fight. Let him believe I was flustered. Inside, I sat in my living room, listening to the creak of the floorboards, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant bark of a dog down the street. Each sound grounded me. I could feel my pulse in my ears, steady now, not frantic. I was ready. The storm was coming, and I would be the one controlling it. By nightfall, I had a plan. Legal action, witnesses, documented evidence, timing. Mark had opened a door, and I was about to walk through it with everything I had. The house was mine, not just by law, but by blood, sweat, and history. He might have tried to take it, But he had underestimated the man standing in the shadows, biding his time, and he was about to learn exactly what that meant. The next few days became a rhythm of quiet obsession. I woke before sunrise, walked the empty streets near my house, feeling the crisp air bite at my cheeks, and imagined every possible scenario. Each one ended the same way. Mark caught off guard, scrambling while I held the upper hand. My daughter's laughter from the kitchen 2 nights ago replayed in my mind like a distant memory, a reminder of why I couldn't let this slide. This wasn't just about pride. It was about protecting my family from someone who clearly thought rules didn't apply to him. I spent hours in Carter's office, poring over the documents again, dissecting every transaction with a meticulous eye. Each page revealed tiny inconsistencies, dates that didn't match, signatures that looked slightly off. It was enough, just enough, the kind of detail only someone who cared, really cared, would notice. I began compiling a timeline, annotating it with notes, dates, and cross-references. Every moment, every movement of Mark's hands in paperwork was recorded in my mind and on paper. The phone calls were harder. I had to tread carefully, talking to old friends and neighbors without letting them know the full depth of what I was planning. One by one, they confirmed odd events. Mark had been unusually secretive, spending late nights at the house when my daughter was away, asking questions about the mortgage, about legal terms he didn't fully understand. Each confirmation tightened the knot of certainty in my chest. He had overplayed his hand, and now I could see it. By the 3rd day, I decided it was time to confront him, without giving him the satisfaction of knowing everything I knew. I drove past the house, keeping a safe distance, observing him unloading groceries, laughing with my daughter as though nothing had happened. The normalcy made my blood boil. Every laugh was a challenge, every casual gesture a provocation. Yet I stayed in the shadows, waiting. Patience was the weapon he didn't anticipate. That night, I sat in my study, the faint smell of old books and polished wood filling the room. My hands hovered over the keyboard, but I didn't type. Instead, I closed my eyes and listened to the ticking clock, to the hum of the ceiling fan, to my own heartbeat. The house itself seemed to whisper reminders of what was mine. Every scratch in the floorboards, every dent in the wall, every scar on the porch told a story of years spent building, defending, maintaining, and it all pointed to one truth. This was my home, no matter what Mark thought. I drafted an email to Carter, outlining the inconsistencies I had found, the witnesses I could call, and the legal avenues we could pursue. Each word was calculated, precise, meant to reinforce her confidence that we were ready. By the time I hit send, the adrenaline had dulled slightly, leaving a simmering heat in its place. I leaned back in my chair, fingers interlaced, and allowed myself a moment to breathe. Not relief, not satisfaction, just the quiet understanding that the next steps were mine to control. Late that night, I walked past the house again, this time standing under a streetlight, the glow casting long shadows across the yard. Mark's truck was gone. The porch was empty. The swing creaked in the wind. I touched the gate, the cold iron biting my fingers, and felt a surge of resolve. He had thought he could make this his domain, but I knew differently now. This wasn't a confrontation of words or anger. It was a war of strategy, patience, and precision, and I was ready. I spent the next morning mapping out my next moves. The neighborhood looked calm, almost idyllic, but I knew better. The streets, the houses, even the quiet hum of distant traffic were just background noise to the war I was planning. I grabbed my laptop, pulled up the documents again, and started organizing everything. Emails, witness statements, notarized papers, timelines. Every detail mattered. Every detail could be the lever that would undo Mark's scheme. Carter called just as I was finishing. Her voice was steady, authoritative, the calm I craved. "I've reviewed your notes," she said. "There's enough here to file a formal challenge immediately, but we need to be surgical. If he senses we're moving, he'll hide everything, and we lose the advantage." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. I understood completely. Patience was more than just waiting. It was controlling the pace, keeping him unaware, letting him think he was still in control. Mark had never met me like this. A man who didn't just react in anger but observed, calculated, and struck with precision. By late afternoon, I was at the local library digging through public records. The smell of old paper and ink wrapped around me, comforting in a strange way. I found documents showing prior ownership, liens that Mark hadn't cleared properly, and even a minor clerical error that could invalidate part of his claim. Each discovery was a spark, igniting a mixture of satisfaction and righteous fury. I began to see the path clearly, a way not just to reclaim the house, but to assert my authority, to remind Mark who really held the power. When I got home, I didn't confront him immediately. Instead, I observed. From my window, I watched him moving through the house, laughing with my daughter over dinner, seemingly unaware of the storm gathering outside. Every casual gesture, every laugh, every glance felt like a challenge. But I didn't rise to it. I let him bask in the illusion of security while I fortified my position. That night, I sat in the living room with a single lamp casting a pool of light around me. The house smelled like dinner, cinnamon and roasted chicken, the kind of smell that should have been comforting. Instead, it fueled my resolve. I could almost feel the house itself urging me on, reminding me of the years invested, the sweat and labor that Mark had tried to claim as his own. I pored over legal documents, highlighting phrases, underlining signatures, connecting dots that he thought were hidden. By the time my eyes burned and my back ached, the plan was complete. I had a timeline, a strategy, and enough leverage to make Mark sweat. Sleep didn't come easily. Every time my eyelids grew heavy, my mind flashed to the confrontation I envisioned. It wouldn't be dramatic, not yet. This wasn't about yelling or slamming doors. It was about dismantling his control with precision, leaving him no room to maneuver. I could almost feel the moment when his confidence would shatter, when he'd realize that every step he took to secure the house had been observed, documented, and countered. Before dawn, I walked the perimeter of the property, feeling the cold metal of the gate, the rough brick under my fingertips, the crunch of gravel under my shoes. Everything was mine, and soon it would be clear to Mark as well. I didn't need to hurry. I just needed to be ready, and I was. The storm was coming, and I would be the calm center, the man who saw every move before it was made. The following morning, I woke with a quiet focus that surprised even me. Most men would have stormed the house by now, fists clenched, voice raised. Not me. I had learned long ago that anger without precision is wasted energy. Today, every move had to count. Every conversation, every step, every glance was part of the plan. I started by reviewing my evidence once more. Each document, each witness note, each time-stamped transaction was carefully cataloged. I even printed extra copies, arranged them neatly in folders labeled by category. The smell of fresh paper mixed with the faint aroma of coffee filled my study. It was comforting, almost ritualistic. This preparation was my armor, my calm before the storm. Carter called mid-morning. "We can file the challenge today," she said. Her tone carried a professional edge, but I could hear the excitement underneath. "Once it's in, Mark will have to respond. And when he does, any misstep is on record. You'll have the leverage you need." I nodded, listening more than speaking. I didn't need her to see the tension coiling in my chest. I had waited this long. I wasn't going to let impatience ruin it now. "Do it," I said. "But make sure every angle is covered. I want this airtight." By late afternoon, I had gathered the final pieces. Witnesses who could confirm Mark's unusual behavior, copies of public records showing inconsistencies, and a timeline that highlighted every suspicious action. I walked through the house, touching walls, floors, and door frames. Each surface felt like a reminder of what I was reclaiming. This wasn't just a house, it was years of sweat, memories, and sacrifices that Mark had thought he could steal. When Mark returned that evening, I didn't confront him. I observed. He moved through the house with the same careless confidence, laughing at a joke my daughter made, tossing his keys onto the counter. I watched from the doorway, a quiet storm brewing behind my eyes. His arrogance made him predictable. He didn't notice the folders I had left on the dining table, labeled neatly with my legal evidence. He didn't suspect that every move he made was being documented. Dinner was quiet, but tense. I kept my voice calm, neutral. Mark tried his usual charm, joking with my daughter, asking casual questions. I answered politely but kept my eyes fixed on him just long enough to let him feel observed. Subtle shifts in posture, a slight hesitation in his smile. He could feel the scrutiny without understanding it. That was enough. After dinner, I retreated to my study. Carter's call came again. "The filing is complete," she said. "Mark has 30 days to respond. Any misstep now is on him. You're in control." A strange calm washed over me. The preparation, the planning, the waiting, it all converged into a single moment of clarity. I wasn't just reclaiming a house. I was reclaiming authority, respect, and the right to protect my family. Mark had underestimated me. He had assumed I would react emotionally, irrationally. Instead, I had watched, waited, and now I was poised. That night I stood at the back porch, the cool air brushing against my face. The swing creaked softly in the wind, a familiar sound I had always loved. Now, it sounded like a warning. Mark didn't know it yet, but everything he had taken would be returned. And more importantly, he would understand that he had crossed a line he could never erase. The storm had arrived, and I was its calm center. Every calculated step, every patient move had led to this. And soon, Mark would learn exactly what it meant to challenge me. The morning sunlight spilled across the kitchen floor, casting long shadows from the chairs and table. I didn't immediately notice the warmth. My mind was already racing through the possibilities. Mark had 30 days to respond to the legal filing, and in that window, every choice he made could tip the scales. I knew him well enough to predict his first move: denial, charm, maybe even an attempt to intimidate my daughter into siding with him. But I wasn't just ready. I was anticipating every angle. I made coffee, the bitter aroma filling the kitchen, grounding me. Each sip was a reminder that patience was now my greatest weapon. Rage had fueled my first steps, but strategy would win this war. I opened my laptop and began reviewing each email I'd sent, each document I'd compiled, ensuring nothing had been overlooked. The folder system I'd created felt almost sacred now. Colored tabs, highlighted sections, margins filled with notes. Every detail was a nail in the coffin of Mark's deceit. By mid-morning, I decided to make a subtle move, one that would give me more insight into his state of mind without tipping my hand. I called my neighbor, an older man who'd known my family for decades. "Anything unusual happen over the past week?" I asked casually. The man hesitated, then said, "I don't know if it's worth mentioning, but I've seen Mark leaving the house late at night, carrying boxes. Didn't look like normal stuff. Thought maybe he was redecorating or moving things around, but it was strange." I thanked him, hanging up with a quiet smile. That confirmation only strengthened my resolve. He was panicking, trying to scramble, unaware that every move was being tracked and would eventually be exposed. I could almost feel his anxiety from miles away. The rest of the day passed in a tense blur. I moved through the house with purpose, checking locks, reviewing security footage, documenting every anomaly. I wasn't just protecting my home, I was psychologically mapping the opponent. I noted his habits, his routines, even the way he smiled at my daughter during dinner. The casual confidence that now seemed forced, brittle. Everything was a piece of the puzzle. By evening, my daughter mentioned a minor disagreement she'd had with him. I listened, careful not to overreact. My silence was louder than words. Mark noticed it too. Later, I caught him pacing in the living room, muttering to himself. His truck had been parked outside earlier, and now he was clearly unsettled. I didn't intervene. I let him stew. Control was not about confrontation yet. It was about letting him feel the tension, letting his mind spin in ways mine had already accounted for. Carter called again as dusk settled over the neighborhood. "Everything is in motion," she said, her voice calm but sharp. "Mark has 30 days to respond, and any misstep will be in the court record. We have multiple angles: ownership inconsistencies, witness statements, and clerical errors in his documents. This is more than solid. It's decisive. He'll have no room to maneuver." I leaned back in my chair, letting her words sink in. Solid, decisive. I let out a slow breath, the tension coiling in my chest easing just slightly, but it was only temporary. My mind immediately returned to the next steps, monitoring his reactions, preparing for the inevitable manipulations, ensuring my daughter remained shielded from his influence. He might think he could charm or intimidate, but I was a wall of preparation, patience, and intent. Night fell, and the house grew quiet. The only sounds were the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the floorboards. I walked to the back porch, the swing moving lightly in the wind. The chill air brushed against my skin, and for the first time in days, I felt something almost like calm. Not relief, not victory, just readiness. Mark had made his move, I had made mine, and now the waiting game had begun. As I stared into the darkness, I imagined him pacing, wondering how I knew so much, why he felt trapped, why the walls of his confidence were starting to crumble. That thought alone sent a shiver down my spine. Not fear, but satisfaction. He had underestimated me from the beginning. He had assumed anger and confrontation would be my tools. Instead, I had weapons he couldn't see: patience, strategy, and the careful, relentless documentation of every lie he had told, every move he had made, every corner he thought he could manipulate. I turned back inside, checking the folders one last time before setting them carefully on the desk. Each one was a statement. My home, my life, my family, and my authority were not negotiable. I poured myself another cup of coffee and sat in silence, listening to the house breathe with me, feeling the pulse of ownership in every wall, every floorboard, every memory stored within. This was more than a legal battle. It was a reclamation. It was a demonstration that I would not be deceived, manipulated, or disrespected. Mark had opened the door to this war, and he would soon learn that the man standing in its center, me, was not just prepared. I was unstoppable. The morning air had a sharp bite as I stepped outside, my breath forming small clouds that disappeared almost instantly in the sun's weak glow. I walked the perimeter of the property, my fingers brushing the iron gate, tracing the brick edges, feeling the weight of ownership in every line, every texture. This house wasn't just a structure. It was years of work, memories, and sacrifices, and I could feel it asserting itself beneath my hands, reminding me of who I was and why I was here. Inside, the house smelled faintly of coffee and the lingering aroma of last night's dinner. My daughter had left early for work, and Mark was nowhere in sight. The silence was almost too perfect, like the calm before a storm. I moved to my study, pulling out the folders, documents, and witness statements once more. I had read them hundreds of times, memorized every signature, every date, every irregularity. Yet I went through them again. Precision was my ally, and complacency was my enemy. By late morning, I decided to make a discreet call to another neighbor, someone who had witnessed Mark acting suspiciously in the past. "Just a quick question," I said, careful not to sound probing. "Have you noticed anything unusual? Strangers? Deliveries? Odd activity?" The neighbor hesitated but eventually confirmed seeing Mark hauling boxes late at night and meeting people I didn't know on the driveway. Each revelation tightened the net. Mark was desperate, and desperation made mistakes inevitable. I spent the afternoon constructing a detailed timeline of events. Each movement, each alteration, each transfer of property was carefully plotted, creating a clear map of deceit. I cross-referenced public records, witness statements, and Mark's own digital footprint. By the time I leaned back in my chair, my eyes stung from concentration, but the clarity I felt was intoxicating. The plan wasn't just coming together, it was unstoppable. Around dinner, Mark returned home. He seemed calm at first glance, but I noticed the subtle signs, the tension in his shoulders, the slight tremor in his hand as he set down his briefcase. He smiled at me, but it didn't reach his eyes. He had begun to sense that the tides had shifted. I didn't confront him. Instead, I let him settle into the house, observing from a distance, cataloging every gesture, every facial twitch. Control wasn't about words yet. It was about presence, about letting him feel the weight of inevitability. Dinner was quiet. My daughter chatted about her day, oblivious to the undercurrent of tension. Mark tried to interject humor, to lighten the mood, but it landed flat. I noticed his jaw tightening, the slight twitch at the corner of his mouth. He was calculating, realizing he had less control than he believed. and I was calm, collected, every move deliberate. After dinner, I retreated to my study and contacted Carter. "Everything is in motion," she said. Her voice was measured, professional, but I could detect the undercurrent of excitement. "Mark has no room to maneuver. Any response he gives will be documented. We're ready to act if he makes a misstep." I smiled, letting her words sink in. The legal action was no longer abstract. It was imminent. The storm wasn't coming. It was already here, though he didn't know it yet. Every calculated step I had taken over the past week had led to this point. His overconfidence, his arrogance, his belief that he could outsmart me. Those were his vulnerabilities, and I was ready to exploit them fully. Night fell, and the house grew silent. The hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the floorboards, even the faint whisper of wind through the trees became my allies. I walked the length of the living room, letting my fingers trail along the furniture, touching memories, past joys, and moments of pride. Every inch of this house was mine, and soon he would be forced to acknowledge it. I spent the late hours preparing mentally. This wasn't just a legal fight, it was psychological, a test of patience, of endurance, and of control. I could almost feel Mark pacing upstairs, restless, unsure, knowing that every move he made could be countered. And I would be ready. I would strike not with anger, but with precision, taking back everything that was rightfully mine, and more importantly, teaching him a lesson in respect and boundaries he would never forget. By the time I finally sat down with a cup of black coffee, the night was deep, and the house seemed to exhale alongside me. I felt the weight of ownership, of history, of determination settle around me. Mark had underestimated me, and he would learn in the coming days that patience, preparation, and relentless focus were more powerful than deceit and arrogance. The storm had taken shape, and I was its calm, unstoppable center. The morning air was sharp and clear as I stepped outside, the faint chill of early autumn brushing against my face. The house stood quietly, the sunlight bouncing off the brick and illuminating the porch where I had spent countless hours with my daughter. Each shadow, each beam of light felt like a reminder of ownership, a tangible symbol of everything Mark had tried to take. I ran my hand along the gate, feeling the cold metal under my fingers, and for a brief moment, I allowed myself a flicker of satisfaction. This was mine, and soon it would be indisputable. I spent the day preparing, not with confrontation, not with anger, but with meticulous calculation. I reviewed every document again, each transaction, each signature, highlighting inconsistencies that would form the backbone of my challenge. Carter's words echoed in my mind: patience, precision, timing. I had the evidence, I had the witnesses, and I had the law firmly on my side. But more than that, I had the advantage of knowing every move my opponent was likely to make. By late morning, I decided to check the security footage from the past week. Mark had been unusually active. Late-night comings and goings, phone calls with unknown numbers, moments of hesitation, as if he was second-guessing his own plans. Each movement was a clue, each hesitation a crack in his confidence. I noted every detail, every timestamp, every anomaly, feeling a grim satisfaction with each discovery. He was panicking, even if he didn't realize it yet, and panic made people careless. When Mark finally returned in the early afternoon, he carried groceries with an easy smile, a mask of casual confidence, but his eyes betrayed him. The slight, darting glances, the way his jaw tightened when he thought I wasn't looking. I watched silently, letting the tension build, letting him feel the weight of the situation without knowing why. Control was not in my words. Control was in the quiet, the presence, the patience. Dinner was a performance. My daughter chatted about her day, oblivious to the tension underlying every interaction. Mark tried his usual charm, joking lightly, but his humor landed hollow. I noticed every twitch of his hand, every hesitation in his smile. The veneer of confidence was cracking, and I let it. I didn't speak of the filing, of the evidence, of the legal actions. It wasn't time. He didn't know that his every misstep had been documented, that each move he had made was part of a growing record that would leave him exposed. After dinner, I retreated to my study. the lamp casting a pool of warm light over the organized chaos of folders and notes. I made the final calls, confirming witnesses and timelines, ensuring every piece of evidence was secure. Carter reassured me again. Any misstep Mark made would be fatal in court. My smile was quiet, controlled. He had thought he could manipulate and intimidate, but now the walls were closing in, and he didn't even know it. Night fell, and I walked through the house, running my fingers along the banister, feeling the smooth wood, the slight imperfections that only years of living could create. Each creak of the floorboards, each whisper of wind outside, became a reminder of history, of investment, of rightful ownership. Mark had tried to erase all of it with a single stroke, but he had underestimated the weight of experience, preparation, and patience. I poured a cup of black coffee and sat on the back porch, staring into the darkness. The swing moved slightly in the breeze, a sound that used to be comforting, now a signal of impending change. I imagined Mark pacing inside, restless, wondering what he had missed, what he had done wrong. He could feel the shift, but he didn't know how far it reached. That was my advantage. He was blind to the full scope of my preparation. By the time my daughter returned from her late shift, I had reviewed the folders one last time, mentally rehearsing the steps to come. This wasn't a confrontation of anger or shouting. This was a reclaiming, a demonstration of precision, control, and inevitable justice. Mark had made a choice when he tried to put the house in his name, but he had forgotten one key fact. He was dealing with a man who understood the long game. I wasn't just reclaiming property. I was reclaiming respect, authority, and peace of mind. As I finally prepared for bed, the quiet of the house felt heavier, yet more certain. Every corner, every room, every memory reaffirmed my ownership. The storm was here, but I was its calm center. Mark had no idea how trapped he was, how every move he made was now part of a narrative that would unravel him completely. I closed my eyes, not with fear or anticipation, but with a deep, unshakable certainty. In the days to come, I would win, not with anger, not with rash decisions, but with patience, strategy, and the unstoppable force of a man defending what was rightfully his. The following morning, the house felt almost too quiet. My daughter had left early for work, and Mark's truck was gone, leaving the driveway empty, the silence almost deafening. I moved through the rooms slowly, deliberately, feeling the weight of ownership in every wall, every floorboard, every surface. This house had been my sanctuary, my refuge, my family's foundation, and now it was a battleground. But I wasn't panicked. I had planned, prepared, and anticipated. Control was mine. I just needed to execute it flawlessly. I spent the morning reviewing every detail of the legal filing. Each clause, each signature, each timeline had to be airtight. I traced my finger along the margins of the documents, memorizing every irregularity, every loophole, every point that would force Mark into a corner. Carter had assured me that any misstep on his part would be decisive, but I couldn't rely solely on that. Preparation, vigilance, and psychological pressure would be just as crucial as the law itself. By late morning, I decided to make a discreet check-in with one of the neighbors who had seen Mark acting suspiciously in the past. "Anything unusual lately?" I asked, keeping my tone casual. The neighbor paused, then mentioned seeing Mark unloading boxes late at night, speaking hurriedly to strangers on the driveway, and appearing unusually anxious. Each piece of information was a confirmation. He was panicking. I didn't speak of the filing, of the evidence, of the storm I had already set in motion. Silence was my ally. The afternoon passed with me observing patterns, reviewing security footage, and mentally rehearsing possible confrontations. Mark returned home around 5, carrying groceries, his movements deliberate, measured but betraying subtle tension. He greeted me casually, a forced smile in place, trying to project normalcy. I nodded politely, my voice neutral. Control was not in confrontation yet. It was in letting him feel the weight of inevitability, the quiet awareness that I knew more than he suspected. Dinner was quiet, deliberately so. My daughter spoke about her day, unaware of the psychological battlefield playing out around her. Mark tried to interject jokes, casual comments, but they fell flat. I noticed his slight hesitation, the way his hand trembled when reaching for the wine glass, the tension in his shoulders. Confidence was fragile, and he was showing cracks. I didn't respond to his humor. I let the silence do the work. After dinner, I retreated to my study, the familiar smell of old books and paper filling the room. Carter called to confirm that all witness statements were secured, every public record verified, and the timeline solid. "Any misstep he makes now will be decisive," she said. I didn't need to hear more. I already knew. My preparation, patience, and relentless documentation had set a trap. Night fell, and I walked through the house, feeling the energy of ownership coursing through the walls, the floors, the memories embedded in each corner. I touched the banister, the kitchen counters, the living room furniture, symbols of a life built and defended. Mark had tried to claim it all with paperwork, arrogance, and deception, but he had underestimated me. He hadn't accounted for strategy, patience, or the meticulous care of a man who would not be defeated. By late night, I poured a cup of black coffee and stepped onto the back porch. The swing moved lightly in the wind, a sound I had once found comforting, now a subtle reminder of what was at stake. I imagined Mark inside, pacing, restless, calculating, wondering what he had done wrong. The thrill of anticipation mixed with a calm resolve. He didn't know the full extent of the net I had woven, and it was too late for him to escape. I reviewed the folders one final time, ensuring that every document was in order, every witness accounted for, and every legal point reinforced. This was more than just reclaiming property. It was about asserting authority, demanding respect, and protecting my family. Every move, every decision I had made over the past weeks had led to this moment. Mark had underestimated me, and soon he would understand exactly who he was dealing with. Finally, I sat in silence, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the floorboards, and the whisper of the night wind through the trees. I allowed myself a brief moment to reflect on the journey, the shock, the betrayal, the rage, and the meticulous planning that had transformed my anger into power. The storm was fully underway, and I was at its calm, controlled center. Mark would not escape the consequences of his actions. Not now, not ever. I set my cup down and allowed my eyes to close, knowing that tomorrow would bring the next wave of confrontation. But I was ready. Patience, strategy, and determination had brought me this far, and they would carry me all the way. This house, my family, my life, it was mine to defend, and I would do so with unyielding resolve. The storm would end, and when it did, Mark would realize he had never truly stood a chance. The house felt heavier than usual that morning. The sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the familiar furniture, the walls I had painted, the photographs I had hung, every detail a silent reminder that this was mine. Yet the air carried an almost imperceptible tension, as if the walls themselves were aware of the storm coming. I ran my hands over the dining table, feeling the grooves and scratches from years of family meals, each one a testament to time spent, memories made, and life lived. Mark had tried to erase all of it, but the proof was indelibly etched into every surface. I began the day with a review of the timeline I had meticulously constructed. Each transaction, every signature, every notarized document had been cross-checked with public records, witness statements, and even small observations. Mark's late-night absences, his phone calls to unknown contacts, the boxes he had moved in and out of the house. Each detail reinforced the same truth. He had overreached, underestimated me, and now the consequences would be unavoidable. By mid-morning, I decided to verify one final set of details. I contacted a local notary who had handled some of the paperwork. The conversation was brief but revealing. "Everything seems correct on the surface," she said cautiously, "but there were some irregularities that, if challenged, could create issues." My pulse quickened. Those irregularities were small, subtle, but combined with the other evidence, they could dismantle his claim completely. I thanked her, ending the call with a calm voice that belied the surge of satisfaction running through me. The afternoon was spent in observation. Mark returned home around 4, his truck pulling up with a familiar, casual precision. But as he stepped out, There was a tension I hadn't noticed before. A slight hesitation in his step, the way his hand lingered on the door handle, the brief glance toward the street as if expecting someone to watch. I observed quietly from the window, taking mental notes. He was aware that something had shifted, though he couldn't pinpoint what. That was the advantage I had cultivated. Dinner was tense. My daughter spoke about her day, laughing lightly, trying to ease the atmosphere. Mark attempted his usual charm, small jokes, casual remarks, but they fell flat. I noticed the subtle signs, the tightness around his eyes, the way his smile faltered, the faint tremor in his fingers. He was uncomfortable, aware of an invisible pressure closing in. I maintained a calm exterior, answering neutrally, letting the silence and my presence do the work. Control was in patience and observation, not confrontation. After dinner, I retreated to my study. The folders and documents were spread neatly across the desk, each one a piece of a puzzle that, once completed, would strip Mark of his false sense of control. I called Carter, confirming that the legal filings were properly executed and that any response from Mark would be documented. Her voice was steady, confident. He'll make a mistake eventually, and when he does, it will be on record. You've done everything necessary to protect your position. I hung up and poured a cup of black coffee, letting the aroma fill the quiet room. I walked through the house, touching familiar surfaces, the banister, the counters, the wooden floorboards. Each touch was a reminder that this was my home, my life, my history. Mark had tried to claim it, but he had underestimated the weight of experience, the patience of a man who had built not just a house, but a life. Night fell, and I moved to the back porch, the swing creaking gently in the cool breeze. The darkness stretched across the yard, and I imagined Mark pacing inside, trying to calculate what had shifted, what he had missed. He was trapped in a web he didn't fully understand, and every step he took tightened the noose of his own making. The anticipation was almost electric, but I remained calm. The storm had already begun, and I was its steady center. I returned to my study, reviewing every folder one last time. The evidence was overwhelming, the witnesses reliable, the legal filings precise. This wasn't a battle of words or anger. This was a reclaiming of what was mine, a calculated, deliberate demonstration that deception and arrogance could not stand against preparation and resolve. Every move I had made over the past days had been designed to ensure that Mark had no escape, no defense, and no understanding of the inevitability closing in around him. By midnight, the house was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the floorboards. I sat in the dim light, sipping my coffee, letting the tension and anticipation settle into a steady rhythm. I had transformed my anger into power, my shock into strategy, and my betrayal into resolve. Mark had thought he could take what was mine, but he had forgotten one vital truth. I had invested not just in this house, but in every detail, every moment, every choice that had led to its foundation. And now, he would pay the price for underestimating me. The next morning, I woke with the same sharp focus that had carried me through the past weeks. The house felt alive with expectation. Every creak of the floorboards and whisper of wind through the trees, a subtle drumbeat, signaling the approach of change. I moved deliberately through each room, letting my fingers brush familiar surfaces, the wooden banister, the dining table, the worn corner of the couch where my daughter liked to curl up with a book. These weren't just objects. They were proof of years invested, proof of a life built with patience, sweat, and care. I spent the early hours reviewing my notes, checking each timeline, every witness statement, each irregularity in Mark's paperwork. Carter had reassured me that the legal filings were solid, but I couldn't leave anything to chance. Precision was key. I needed to be ready for any reaction, any attempt he might make to manipulate or intimidate. Every possible move had to be anticipated, documented, and countered before it happened. By mid-morning, I decided to make a subtle check-in with a neighbor who had previously noticed Mark's odd behavior. "Anything unusual lately?" I asked casually. The neighbor mentioned seeing Mark pacing in the yard, moving boxes around in ways that seemed aimless, and talking on the phone in hushed tones. I thanked him and hung up, letting the quiet satisfaction of confirmation settle in. Mark was panicking, and panic made people careless. That would be my advantage. I spent the rest of the morning organizing the folders and evidence, preparing mentally for the day I would confront him. Each folder represented a piece of the puzzle: notarized documents with questionable signatures, timelines of transfers that didn't make sense, witness statements confirming suspicious activity. Together, they formed a web of accountability Mark couldn't escape. Mark returned home around noon, carrying groceries, his movements careful, almost rehearsed. He smiled at me, but it didn't reach his eyes. He glanced toward the folders I had left visible on the dining table, then quickly looked away. A flicker of tension crossed his face. Subtle, but unmistakable. I didn't react. I let him stew in uncertainty, letting him feel the weight of inevitability pressing down without knowing why. Dinner was deliberately mundane. My daughter chatted about her day, unaware of the silent battle unfolding around her. Mark attempted humor, his words light and casual, but his tension undermined the act. I noticed the subtle quivers of his fingers as he poured wine, the way his jaw tightened when our eyes met, the faint pause before he spoke. Every detail confirmed what I already knew. He was aware that the balance of power had shifted, but he didn't yet understand the extent. After dinner, I retreated to my study. The folders and documents were spread neatly across the desk, each one a calculated piece of evidence, a stepping stone toward reclaiming what was mine. Carter called to confirm that the filings had been executed correctly, and that the legal clock had begun ticking. "Any misstep on his part will be decisive," she said. I didn't need to hear more. I knew. Every careful observation, every documented irregularity, every witness statement was a thread in the net that now enclosed him. I poured a cup of black coffee and stepped onto the back porch. The swing moved gently in the breeze, a soft creak that used to be comforting, now a reminder of the storm I had set in motion. I imagined Mark pacing inside, restless, calculating, wondering what he had missed. He didn't know that every move he had made was anticipated, every misstep noted, every lie documented. The inevitability of exposure hung over him like a shadow he couldn't escape. Night deepened, and I returned to my study for one final review. Every folder was in order, every piece of evidence cross-referenced, every timeline meticulously arranged. I allowed myself a brief moment to reflect on the past weeks. The shock of discovery, the betrayal, the simmering rage transformed into careful strategy. Mark had tried to take what was mine, but he had underestimated the patience, focus, and relentless resolve of a man defending his family and his home. By the time I set my cup down, the house was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the floorboards. I sat in the dim light, letting the tension settle into a steady rhythm. I was calm, not because the fight was over, but because I was prepared. I had converted betrayal into power, and the storm that Mark had begun would end with him exposed, humbled, and unable to escape the consequences of his actions. As I finally prepared for bed, I felt the weight of ownership settle around me. The house, the memories, the life I had built, all were mine to defend, and I would do so with relentless precision. Mark had thought he could outmaneuver me, but he had forgotten one crucial fact. I was ready, patient, and unstoppable. And when the confrontation came, he would see exactly what it meant to challenge me. The house felt heavy with expectation that morning, as though it knew what was coming. I moved through each room deliberately, touching familiar surfaces: the smooth banister, the worn edges of the dining table, the corner of the couch where my daughter liked to curl up. Each mark, each dent, each scratch was a story of our lives, a history Mark had tried to claim as his own. I let my fingers linger on them for a moment, grounding myself. This was mine, and soon, it would be indisputable. I spent the morning reviewing the evidence one final time. The documents, witness statements, timelines, and notarized papers were all organized meticulously. Carter had reassured me that the filings were solid, that any misstep Mark made would be decisive, but I needed to be thorough. Strategy wasn't just about legal maneuvering. It was about control, patience, and ensuring that when the confrontation came, it would be complete and undeniable. By late morning, I decided to check the security footage again, looking for anything that might indicate Mark's state of mind. He had been restless, pacing the house, moving boxes, making late-night calls. Each action was a subtle confirmation that he knew something was off, that the tides had shifted. I noted the times, the patterns, the hesitations. He was panicking, and panic was predictable. That predictability was my weapon. Mark returned home around midday. I watched from the window as he stepped out of his truck, moving with casual precision but betraying small signs of tension. The slight hesitation in his steps, the way his hand lingered on the door handle, the brief glance toward the street. I didn't approach him. I didn't speak. I let him feel the pressure of my quiet presence, letting him sense the inevitability he couldn't yet see. Dinner was tense, but controlled. My daughter talked about her day, her laughter a fleeting moment of light in the quiet storm of the house. Mark tried to interject humor, casual remarks meant to lighten the atmosphere, but they fell flat. I noticed the small tells, the tightness around his eyes, the twitch in his fingers, the subtle tremor when he lifted his glass. Confidence was fragile, and it was cracking. I kept my composure, my calm a silent statement of power. After dinner, I retreated to my study. The folders were laid out like a battlefield, each one a piece of evidence, a step toward reclaiming what was mine. Carter called to confirm that the filings had gone through, that the legal clock was ticking, and that Mark had no room to maneuver. Her calm, assured voice reinforced what I already knew. I had prepared perfectly. Every document, every witness statement, every cross-referenced timeline ensured that he couldn't escape the consequences of his actions. I poured a cup of black coffee and stepped onto the back porch. The swing moved gently in the breeze, its soft creak, a reminder of quiet moments I had cherished here, now transformed into a signal of the impending storm. I imagined Mark pacing inside, trying to calculate his next move, unaware that I had already anticipated it. Every misstep, every lie, every half-truth would soon be exposed. The inevitability of it sent a chill through me. Not fear, but satisfaction. He had underestimated me. Night settled over the house, and I walked through the rooms, touching surfaces, noting the faint marks of our lives. I thought about the betrayal, the shock, the rage, and how I had converted it into focus, strategy, and resolve. Mark had tried to claim what was mine, but he had not accounted for patience, for observation, for relentless preparation. He was playing checkers while I had been playing chess all along. I returned to my study and reviewed the folders one last time, letting each detail sink in. This wasn't a confrontation born of anger or impulsiveness. This was a reclamation of authority, respect, and control. Every step I had taken, every observation, every call, every document prepared me for this moment. Mark had thought he could outsmart me, but he was about to learn that a man defending his family, his home, and his life would always hold the upper hand. Finally, I sat in silence, listening to the house settle around me, the hum of the refrigerator, the faint creak of the floors, the whisper of wind through the trees. I allowed the tension to settle into a steady rhythm. The storm had arrived, but I was its calm, impenetrable center. Mark had no idea how thoroughly he had been outmaneuvered, and when the confrontation came, it would be complete, undeniable, and utterly decisive. The morning sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting thin stripes across the living room floor. The house felt alive, every surface, every creak, every shadow a reminder of what was at stake. I moved deliberately, touching the wooden banister, the worn edges of the dining table, the corner of the couch where my daughter often curled up. These weren't just objects. They were markers of a life built with sweat, patience, and care. Mark had tried to claim them, but he didn't understand the weight of history or the resolve of the man who had built it. I spent the morning reviewing the evidence one final time. The folders were arranged meticulously on the desk, each containing notarized documents, witness statements, timelines, and cross-referenced records. Carter had assured me that the legal filings were solid, but I needed to be certain. Preparation had to be absolute. Any misstep, even a small one, could give Mark an opening. Precision wasn't just a strategy, it was survival. By mid-morning, I decided to check in discreetly with the neighbors who had witnessed Mark's suspicious behavior. One by one, they confirmed what I already suspected. Mark had been restless, making late-night trips, speaking in hushed tones to strangers, moving boxes that didn't belong. Each confirmation tightened the net I had woven, and I allowed a brief private satisfaction to settle in my chest. He was panicking, and panic made people predictable. Mark returned home around noon carrying groceries, moving with careful precision but betraying subtle tension. He smiled, trying to mask it, but I could see the strain in his shoulders, the tightness in his jaw, the fleeting glance toward the street. I didn't confront him. I didn't speak. I let him stew in uncertainty, allowing him to feel the pressure without knowing why. That was the advantage I had built over days of observation, preparation, and calculation. Dinner was quiet but deliberate. My daughter shared her day, laughing lightly, unaware of the silent battle unfolding around her. Mark tried his usual charm, small jokes and casual remarks, but they fell flat. I observed him closely, noting the tremor in his hands as he poured wine, the slight hesitation before speaking, the tension in his posture. Confidence, I realized, was a fragile thing, and his was beginning to crack. After dinner, I retreated to my study, reviewing every folder and every piece of evidence one last time. Carter called to confirm that all filings were in order, and that the legal clock was ticking. "Any misstep from him will be decisive," she said. I didn't need to hear more. I knew it. Every detail, every observation, every document prepared me for the moment that Mark would finally understand the consequences of his actions. By evening, I decided it was time to set the final stage. I left a few folders visible on the dining table, subtle, but enough to make him notice. They weren't open, just present. I wanted him to see, to sense the inevitability of the situation without fully understanding it. I imagined him noticing, his mind racing, realizing that his control was slipping. Patience had been my weapon, and now it would begin to yield results. Night fell, and I stepped onto the back porch, the swing moving lightly in the cool breeze. I could almost hear the thoughts running through Mark's mind. The calculations, the attempts to understand what had shifted. He didn't know that I had anticipated every action, every attempt to manipulate, every lie he thought he could get away with. I sipped my coffee, letting the quiet of the house sink in, feeling the calm before the final confrontation. By midnight, the house was still. Every room, every surface, every memory was aligned with my purpose. The storm I had begun was nearly complete, and I could sense the shift in energy, the tension in the walls, in the air. Mark had overplayed his hand, and now he would have no choice but to respond. But the outcome had already been written. The evidence was overwhelming, the preparation meticulous, and the patience unwavering. I allowed myself a brief moment of reflection. The shock, the betrayal, the simmering rage, it had all been transformed into clarity, strategy, and focus. This was no longer just about reclaiming a house. It was about asserting control, protecting my family, and teaching a man who had overstepped the unshakable limits of respect. By the morning, the final act of this long game would begin, and Mark would finally understand what it meant to underestimate me. I finally set my cup down, letting the calm settle into every fiber of my being. The confrontation was imminent, but I was ready, not with anger, but with preparation, precision, and unwavering resolve. The house, the memories, the family I had built, all of it was mine, and by the end of this, he would know it. The morning was crisp, the kind of autumn day that made every breath feel sharp and alive. I walked through the house one last time before Mark arrived, touching the familiar surfaces, the banister, the worn edges of the dining table, the couch corner where my daughter curled up, and letting the history of our lives sink into me. This was more than just a house. It was a life built on sweat, care, and sacrifice. And today, it would finally be clear to everyone that it belonged to me. I had spent weeks preparing, gathering evidence, documenting every transaction, every lie, every suspicious action Mark had taken. Carter had assured me that the filings were solid, the witnesses reliable, and the legal footing unshakable. But preparation alone wasn't enough. The timing, the subtle pressure, the psychological edge, it all had to converge. And now it would. Mark arrived mid-morning, stepping out of his truck with a practiced casualness that didn't fool me. The tension was visible in his posture, the slight tightness in his jaw, the nervous glance toward the house as he approached. I greeted him with neutral politeness, every movement calm, deliberate, controlled. He tried to meet my gaze, to project confidence, but it wavered, faltering almost immediately. He could feel the shift, even if he didn't understand it yet. I led him to the living room, where the folders were clearly visible on the table, organized, labeled, impossible to ignore. "I assume you've seen these," I said, my tone calm but carrying the weight of inevitability. He glanced at them, swallowing slightly, his carefully constructed facade cracking. I don't know what," he began, but I cut him off with a raised hand. "Save it," I said. "You've made your choices. Now it's time to face the consequences. Every document, every witness statement, every irregularity, everything points to the fact that what you tried to claim as yours never belonged to you. Not legally, not morally, not in any way that matters." His eyes darted to the folders again, the weight of the truth beginning to settle. I didn't mean," he started, but I could see the panic rising beneath the surface. He was grasping at excuses, trying to reclaim control he had already lost. I stepped closer, calm but unyielding. "It doesn't matter what you meant. What matters is the reality. You tried to take something that wasn't yours, and now the law, and I, are correcting that mistake. You underestimated me, and that was your first and final error." He slumped into the nearest chair, pale and silent. The confidence he had worn like armor had dissolved completely. I could see the fear, the realization that he had been outmaneuvered at every step. It wasn't just the legal filings, the evidence, or the witnesses. It was the patience, the strategy, the careful observation. I had anticipated his every move, and now he had nowhere to hide. I sat opposite him, letting the silence do its work. "You'll have your chance to respond in court, of course," I said evenly. "But understand this, every lie, every attempt to manipulate, every step you took to claim what wasn't yours is documented. There is no escape, and there is no more room for doubt." For a long moment he said nothing. Then, quietly, he nodded, his face a mixture of defeat and begrudging respect. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The calm, the inevitability, the undeniable evidence spoke louder than any words could. After he left, I walked through the house, feeling the walls, the floors, the memories absorb the victory that had been earned through patience and meticulous preparation. The house was quiet again, but it carried a different energy now, a sense of restored order, of respect reclaimed, of authority solidified. I sat on the back porch, the swing moving slightly in the breeze, and finally allowed myself to breathe fully. The storm had passed. Mark had been exposed, the house restored to its rightful ownership, and my family's peace secured. The betrayal, the anger, the planning, all of it had led to this moment, and the satisfaction was deep and unshakable. When my daughter returned home later that evening, she noticed the calm. "Everything okay?" she asked softly. I smiled, letting her see the quiet victory. "Better than okay," I said. "Everything is as it should be." I knew as I looked around the living room, the kitchen, the hallways filled with memories, that this was more than just a victory in court. It was a reclaiming of respect, of authority, and of the unshakable truth that when a man defends what is his with patience, strategy, and resolve, nothing can take it from him. And as the house settled into quiet that night, I felt a weight lift. The storm had come, but I had been its calm center. Mark had underestimated me, and now he understood. The house, my family, and my life were intact. And in that moment I realized something else. Victory isn't loud. It isn't dramatic. It is quiet, precise, and absolute. And tonight, it was mine.